Son of the Storm Dragon by Ashton K. 423. Ren Daisuke, thought my unconventional life would end after years of working in special forces and the CIA. So imagine my surprise when I died and was reincarnated as a dragon of all things in this world filled with magic and monsters. This is the story of my adventures in the greatest journey of all time, under the new name Rimuru Tempest. Tensura AU. Chapter 13, Dragon's Day Off. It had been a month since my return to the ogre village, and things seemed to have fallen back into the same old routine as prior to my leave. Well, for the most part. Wake up early in the morning with the rest of the ogres for their early training session, which was mainly sparring with the elder for me or practicing my kata. The old man had apparently thought I may have been slacking off in my training during the time that I was gone. He was glad to see me prove him wrong. I had taken every opportunity one could to train my body and mind whilst I was in the goblin village, with great sage giving me plenty of advice on mental cultivation and meditation techniques. Aside from sword practice, I'd also been working on my personal martial arts style, the one great sage had created and optimized using my knowledge on various manga and anime. I'd all but perfected my dragon claw art by now, and was now in the process of creating another dragon-related art. I'd also taken this time to also help Ranga train. While non-humanoid monsters tended to be limited in the range of arts they could learn, it didn't mean they couldn't learn any at all. At the moment, I had him trying to gather his aura around his front claws in an attempt to recreate his own version of my dragon claw art. Maybe later on I'd have him attempt the same with his fangs. If Ranga could learn these techniques, and even teach Raya and the other Tempest Wolves, then they would grow that much stronger as a pack. Aside from that, Ranga had also been practicing his lightning manipulation extra skill. Thus far he only had one art under it called Lightning Bolt. It allowed him to summon a bolt of yellow lightning from the sky to strike his target, and it definitely seemed strong too. The ogres had been impressed when he vaporized an entire tree and shattered some rocks with this move. However, I wanted to increase his range of arts he could use under this skill, which is why I was following a very Pokemon-like training regime for Ranga when it came to his overall training, taking inspiration from electric-type Pokemon and seeing if we could perhaps implement similar moves with Ranga. Great Sage had already confirmed that the chances for succeeding with this idea were 78%, meaning it was more than plausible. I had so many ideas of what moves I wanted Ranga and his pack to learn. I'd also taken the time to start experimenting some with my new skills, namely Black Lightning, Black Wind, Shadow Movement, and Thought Reading. The first two I made sure to practice away from the village, mainly due to being unsure as to what would happen if I lost control or simply put in too much power, which later turned out to be the right choice, as I accidentally lived up to the title Son of the Storm Dragon. Black Lightning turned out to be a much stronger version of Ranga's lightning manipulation skill, probably due to the storm magic element mixed into it. Thus far I only had two arts for it, the first being Lightning Bolt, which was identical to Ranga's ability, but stronger and larger in size. Oh, and the lightning was black, of course. The second was a sword art called Lightning Strike. The name was basic, but that's because it was meant to be self-explanatory. Basically, I infuse my blade with black lightning and strike at my foe. Its damage output depended on the amount of power put into it, and it had a chance of stunning or paralyzing my opponent. Black Wind turned out to be trickier than I thought it would be. Basically, it allowed me to produce and manipulate black currents of wind that I could shape as I pleased given practice and proficiency. The tricky part was that this wind was very corrosive. All living things that seemed to come into contact with it would start to decay, be it trees or wild monsters I tested it against. Great Sage assured me that this was something I could control, and that those with my divine protection or similar true dragon magic to my mother's would not be affected by these decaying effects. According to Great Sage, the decaying effects of Black Wind were similar to that of the Rot skill, only much stronger and more potent, meaning it would be much more painful and harder to heal from. Breathing in this air was a quick way to get yourself killed, and because of that, I had to be extremely careful with this skill so it didn't end up harming my allies. Shadow Movement turned out to be a rather fun skill to have. It basically allowed me to cover large distances instantly, almost like teleportation. However, its range was limited depending on the strength of the user, meaning some would have to be jumping in and out of shadows if they wanted to travel a large distance, like say from the ogre village to the goblin village. As it stood, the Tempest wolves and I could make such a trip with ease and instantly travel between both villages. According to Great Sage, strength and proficiency were the ones that determine the range of one's jump in a single movement. Using Dworgen and the Goblin Village as another example, Great Sage explained that I could theoretically make it in a single jump. Ranga and Raya may need 3 jumps and 2 pit stops, and the other Tempest wolves would need double that. Regardless of the pit stops, using shadow movement cut a great deal of time when it came to traveling, and I could already see the potential trade advantages of having such a skill in the near future. Transportation of goods that would usually take weeks could be done in mere hours with such a skill. Lastly was the skill, Thought Reading. This was the sub-skill of the unique skill, Tyrant, that I had copied from Gazel Dwargo. I'd been a bit hesitant about using this, especially on the goblins and ogres as it felt immoral, but I quickly let go of such hesitations. I needed to learn to use this skill properly. It would be very useful in future endeavors. I'd even gotten the idea of using Thought Reading alongside Desire. This allowed me to both read one's thoughts as well as their emotions. If I used the latter skill correctly, I'd even be able to manipulate an individual's emotions, indirectly controlling their thoughts in the process. Unfortunately, I haven't had the chance to try out this combination as it requires me having a drawn-out conversation with people, and I don't feel comfortable using such a skill on the people I'm close with, such as the Ogre Chief and his family, along with the Elder. So thus far, I'd only stuck with reading the minds of those I wasn't quite as close with. It had been interesting to hear the thoughts of the goblins, wolves, and ogres, especially when pertaining to me. The wolves naturally saw me as the one true leader and master of their pack. From reading their thoughts, I'd been able to gather that while they would gladly follow Ranga and Raya, their true loyalty lay with me. If ordered, they would gladly turn on the 2 superior wolves. I didn't know whether I should be happy with that or concerned. Moving on, reading the minds of the goblins, I wasn't that surprised by their thoughts. For lack of a better term, they revered me, saw me as something akin to a savior, which made sense, given that they used to be at the bottom of the food chain. They were but mere prey for almost any other creature in the forest, but thanks to me, they had evolved and gotten much stronger, and their lives were far better. They weren't the strongest creatures in the forest, far from it, but they were vastly more capable. Then lastly, there were the ogres. Their thoughts of me were just about what I'd expected of them just by studying their culture. They had a great deal of respect for me and the strength that I held. Even though they didn't know the true extent of my power, they knew it was far beyond theirs, meaning I was worthy of their respect. Being the son of Viridia, the young lord of the land, and the new guardian of the forest also seemed to have increased the amount of respect they have for me. Zijin and Apito had been a bit unique when reading their thoughts. I hadn't interacted with them as much as I should have, given they were among the strongest in the Goblin Village, something I'd be sure to fix. I was a bit surprised when Zijin's thoughts mainly consisted of nothing but the desire to grow stronger for my sake of all things. From what I gathered, he felt indebted to me, and he wanted to be worthy of my protection by being of more use to me. The level of subservience there was a bit surprising, but if it motivated him to work hard and grow stronger, then I wasn't going to complain. Apito was more or less the same in her thoughts. She was hard at work both in training and in honey production, due to wanting to contribute more to my goals, though I was pretty sure I hadn't said anything about having a goal to them. Still though, the amount of honey she was producing by using her drone bees to collect pollen from the Dryad territory was actually surprising, so again there were no complaints. All in all, thought reading was a pretty neat skill to have, but I made sure not to rely on it too much. I already had that habit with Desire, so it would be bad if I constantly used both of them. I see, so you're taking her fishing? The Ogre Chief said as he stroked his beard in thought. Today was a bit of a breather day for me. I wasn't going to be joining the hunting party or involving myself in any of the village affairs. That said, laying around all day was boring, so I decided to go fishing. Ranga apparently knew a good spot and was more than happy to take me. Seeing the opportunity, I'd also decided to bring the purple ogress along. She made a lot of progress in her culinary skills over the last month. While it still tasted bad, it no longer emitted the aura of an A-rank monster, nor did it burn your taste buds on contact. Heck, even the appearance now resembled that of poorly done food rather than the monstrosity it used to be. It was a sign of progress and good things in the near future. I wanted to bring her along this trip to introduce the delights of seafood. While the ogres did eat fish from time to time, the goal here was to have her prepare fish she had caught herself. There was nothing more satisfactory than cooking a meal you worked hard to catch yourself. Yes, I initially planned to go alone, just to take it easy for the day, but then I figured it'd be a good experience for her. Plus, patience seems to be one of her weakest points from my observations. I said with an amused laugh, the chief joining in before taking a sip from his cup of tea. Yes, she has quite the temper. My son has been on the receiving end of it quite a few times. I suppose she takes after her father in that regard, the chief said with a small smile on his face, probably thinking of the purple ogress's father. Lord Rimuru, would you be so kind as to accept a request of mine? The ogre chief asked. By now I'd grown used to all this formal talk and had accepted that this is how almost everyone would speak to me. It depends on what the favor is. I replied as I drank from my own cup of tea. I wouldn't make any promises. I made it a point to keep my promises, so I never took them lightly, lest I dig my own grave. Fair enough. Would you be willing to take my son and daughter on this fishing expedition of yours as well? The chief asked, much to my surprise. That's the request he had. I'd made a bigger deal out of it for no reason. Maybe I was just being overly cautious. May I ask why? I wasn't against taking them with me, especially the princess. But was it really a good idea for him to be letting both his children out of the village? They were his only children and were like royalty in this village. There's no special reason. I just want them to take a day off from their duties. So I'm seizing the opportunity while it's being presented. The chief said with a fatherly smile. There was no deceit in his words. To be honest, I have no real reason to refuse. I liked spending time with the princess, about as much as I liked spending time with the purple ogress. Things between the redhead and I had improved a bit since he gave a formal apology to me in front of the chief. I wouldn't call us friends, but there was no more bad blood. If anything, this expedition may help close that gap. If nothing else, I get to see a bit more of the real him and not the angry asshole he'd been before. I have no problem with it. The more the merrier. I replied with a shrug. In the end, bringing them along would only serve to make the day more enjoyable for me, rather than taking this break on my own. I took another sip of tea, enjoying both the warmth and flavor. I couldn't help but also note the sweet flavor of honey within the tea. It seems the ogres have really taken a liking to Apito's honey, I thought to myself with a smile. It was one of the few things that had been put up for trade when the chief and I sat down and got talking about what relations the ogre and goblin villages would have. To be honest, I had been a bit worried that the ogres would make unreasonable demands, not because I thought little of them, but rather because I was negotiating on behalf of a weaker species. But the chief turned out to be more level-headed than I thought. Flashback. Thank you for taking the time to actually hear me out, I said as I took the seat opposite to the chief. It had been 2 days since my return, and the chief and I were about to go into detail about the potential trade agreements between the ogre village and the goblin village. No, I should be the one thanking you, Lord Rimuru, the chief said as he shook his head sideways. This is just as much an opportunity for me and my people as it is for the goblins under your protection. I hope we can come to an agreement that is satisfactory for the both of us. I nodded my head in agreement. I understood the meaning behind his words clearly. As much as the chief and his people respected me, they wouldn't simply bend over and supply the goblin village, not unless I was willing to use force. He wanted a mutually beneficial agreement, which was fine with me since I never had any intention of swindling the ogres. I'd compensate them properly for their efforts. So do I. Now let's get started, I said as our expressions became slightly more serious. As well acquainted as the two of us were, this was now a discussion between two leaders who were looking out for the interests of their own people. As I said on the night of my arrival, hiring of the dwarves helped improve a lot of areas within the goblin village such as housing, clothing, and craftsmanship, and the dryads have also started to aid in agricultural production. Yes, you've pretty much covered most of the essentials. Food, shelter, clothing. All that is left is security. The chief said, to which I nodded my head. I'm not worried about the wolves at the current moment. They are natural predators and will grow into their newfound power. The goblins, however, I trailed off with a frown. They've been at the bottom of the food chain for as long as they can remember. They have no fighting skill or experience whatsoever, and their confidence is severely lacking. Their recent evolutions can't change those shortcomings. Indeed, goblins, despite their large population, have always relied on others for protection and have always been submissive to stronger species. Even though they've evolved, you cannot expect them to change their ways so quickly. The chief explained before closing his eyes and letting out a sigh. That being said, I can understand why you'd like us to teach them. They would not only gain the skills to use their newfound strength, but they would also grow more confident in their own power. That's the idea, I responded. It was a big ask. I was asking the ogres to share their techniques with goblins, creatures they viewed as beneath them. Very well, but if we were to help the goblins, what would we hope to gain in return? The chief asked. I'd been expecting this question. I would have been more suspicious if they had just accepted and gone along with it. Yes, asking you to share your techniques is something that can't be asked without an exchange of equal value. I responded as I nodded my head. I then reached into my stomach and brought forth a magisteel crystal about the size of a person's head using Apex Predator. Tell me, Chief, do you know what this is? The shocked expression on his face told me all that I needed to know. That's a magistone, or? The amount of magicules in that crystal alone, the chief whispered in shock. Close, but not quite. This is magisteel, the refined and much more condensed version of magistone ores. I said as the chief tore his eyes away from the magisteel and turned back to me. If you're familiar with magistone, then I'm sure you know what it is used for. Weapons made from magisteel boast a higher magicule conductivity than those made from magistone and grow with their user. I found a lot of magistone ores in the cave where my mother had been sealed and further refined them into magisteel. I see. So you wish to trade the magisteel in exchange for us teaching the goblins? The chief asked, but I quickly shook my head sideways. Not quite. As selfish as it sounds, I'd rather keep the production of magisteel weapons exclusive to the goblin village. Instead, I'd like to propose the dwarves also manufacturing weapons for the ogres, or at the very least your main forces. The ogre chief seemed to frown slightly at that. I wasn't against the idea of giving the ogres magisteel, but I'd rather not have it spread like a wildfire. Plus, the goblin village needed a way to stand out even among the stronger villages in Jura. I needed to get the ogre chief to accept this deal. If you're worried about the quality or craftsmanship of the weaponry, then would you please take a look at this blade first, then tell me your honest thoughts. I added as a sheathed katana appeared in my right hand from my stomach. Holding the blade vertically with both hands on opposing ends, I held it out for the chief to take. The scabbard of the blade was pitch black with red and gold lines drawn out in intricate patterns that made it look amazing. The handle was similarly black with the top, half a red and white spherical design. The chief took the blade and slowly began to pull it out of its scabbard. The blade was very well done, shining and brightly reflecting the light that came in from the window, stainless and sharp, ready to tear into the flesh of its foe. Kaijin had really outdone himself with this blade. Then again, I had told him that I may just give this to the chief should he choose to accept it. Try channeling magicules into it, I said with a grin. The ogre chief, who'd been mesmerized by the blade, snapped out of his thoughts and nodded his head. I felt the magicules be channeled into the blade before a split second later, the sword erupted into bright orange flames. The temperature of the room increased, and the flames lit up every corner of the room. Oh my, the chief muttered as he quickly stopped channeling energy. Right, for a moment I had forgotten we were in a wooden building. With the amount of wooden furniture in here, things really could have gone bad. As I said, magisteel has high magicule conductivity, and that is only a 50% magisteel weapon, I said with a bit of pride. The chief looked at the blade for a little bit longer, before letting out a sigh and sheathing it within its scabbard. Why did I have a feeling I wasn't going to hear the answer I was hoping to hear? This is a beautiful blade, Lord Rimuru, very well made. But we ogres have never had our weapons made by outsiders. I mean no disrespect to you or the dwarven blacksmith that made this blade, but I don't think my people and I would feel comfortable wielding a blade that was made by people we don't know or have never met," the chief said with an apologetic bow. Man, that really threw a dent in things, didn't it? I mean, I understood where the ogre chief was coming from. The ogres pretty much lived as a tight-knit community. It was kind of like those small towns where everybody knew each other. So it made sense that they would all go to one place for weapons and the like. Having someone you're not used to crafting your weapons all of a sudden would make anyone wary. These were tools that you carried with you into battle, a battle which could mean life or death. It made sense you'd want to stick with a reliable blacksmith who'd never let you down before. That being said, I wasn't willing to give up just yet. Then how about this? You can have your top blacksmiths work alongside the dwarves? I'm sure your blacksmiths may have some knowledge and techniques that even the dwarves may not know of in this field. And the dwarves can share their knowledge too. And given that they are known as the best craftsmen in the world, that would benefit the ogres in the long run, too. And them working together could produce more high-quality weapons and gear. I proposed, hoping that this we could reach some kind of middle ground. The chief took a moment to think about it, closing his eyes as if meditating on the issue. Yes, I suppose that is the best possible solution given the circumstances. I'd be willing to send 2 of our blacksmiths to work in the goblin village. The ogre chief said with a nod. I couldn't help the relieved smile that made its way onto my face. For a second, I thought the chief was going to turn down that offer, but in the end this was the best possible outcome for me as well. If all went well, Kaijin and the goblins under him would also learn some valuable techniques from the ogre smiths, and vice versa. In the end, the ogre chief and I were able to come to an agreement on the matter. He would send 2 blacksmiths along with 2 types of instructors for each type of weapon, making for a total of nearly 20 ogres all temporarily moving to the goblin village. I had no complaints. This was a better outcome than what I had been hoping for. Of course, the chief and I didn't stop there. We decided to see what else the 2 villages could exchange and offer one another. In the end, I was able to get the ogres to produce and trade clothing with the goblins in exchange for Apito's honey and getting a few magic instructors in exchange for potions. I wasn't all too sure if goblins had an aptitude for magical skills, but it was worth a shot to have the ogres teach them something. Aside from that, the ogre chief requested to meet the head of the goblin village, Rigard, just so he could have a better understanding of who he was dealing with. That arrangement was easily made with the Tempest Wolf's shadow movement. Flashback end. And now a month later, the trade relations between the ogres and goblins were going well. The goblins being trained were growing into a decent force, doing their best to learn and properly train their bodies into that of warriors. It took some time for them to find the weapons that suited them best, but when they did, they were with their respective instructors. For those that were learning magic, which mainly consisted of goblinas, it was going a little bit slower, but the progress was visible. As I'd expected, goblins had a lower magical reserve than ogres simply because they were of lower rank, and as a result weren't able to use magical skills on a scale as large. Still, they were making progress, and from what I could tell, they had a higher aptitude than most humans, which was good enough for the time being. Lord Rimuru, I heard the princess call out. I was now by the village gates waiting with Ranga and the purple ogress for the young master and the princess. The 3 of us had prepared for the trip beforehand, so we just had to wait for the 2 royals to get ready themselves since they had been given such short notice, and it seemed they were finally ready to go. I'm sorry, I hope we didn't keep you waiting too long, she added with a bow of her head, her brother also joining in. Don't apologize. If anything, I should be the one apologizing for giving the 2 of you such short notice, I said as waved off their apologies. That being said, I should have invited you myself rather than having your father suggest it. I did kind of feel bad about that. It made me look inconsiderate, but I really had planned to go solo, at least until I invited the purple ogress, so there was no reason to feel guilty. Father told us that you intended to take this as a day off from training and your responsibilities, the young master said, though I still don't understand why you invited her along with you. He added as he turned towards the purple-haired ogress. I could tell he hadn't meant anything bad by that last statement, despite how rude it sounded. What's that supposed to mean? The purple ogress shouted in offense before marching right up to the young master with her hands on her hips. Are you forgetting I'm Lord Rimuru's disciple? Since when did I ever call you my disciple? I couldn't help but wonder with a deadpan. So of course he would take me with him on this fishing trip, she said with pride as she stood up straight and placed her hand on her chest. But still, for a man and woman to head into the forest alone, it just seems improper and scandalous. The princess said as she hid the lower half of her face behind her large sleeves, her voice sickly sweet, and yet her eyes glared at the purple ogress. Given my current physique, do I even count as a man? There's nothing improper about it, princess. After all, I am his student. It's only natural he would choose to spend a lot of time with me. The purple ogress taunted back. The princess' eyebrows began to twitch, and yet she still maintained her sweet smile, and I say that with a heavy dose of sarcasm. Besides, aren't you too busy with your duties to be bothered by such small things? Ah, but Lord Rimuru is an honored guest of our village. Father has put me in charge of making sure his time with us is as comfortable as possible, the princess said, her smile becoming strained. A pink aura suddenly began to form around her. That's news to me, I thought as I turned to the young master for confirmation, to which he nodded his head. Did the chief do this because of how I suggested the princess and I were close friends on the night of my return? Not that I'm complaining, that just means I get to spend more time with her. I see, the purple ogress said with an equally strained smile, as a purple aura began to surround her as well. The air around them became thick from the tension that was building up as the two glared at each other, sparks literally shooting out and clashing in a test of will and resolve. Now, I wasn't some dense manga or anime protagonist. I knew what was going on here. Heck, I'd been suspecting it for a while now, about a week into my return to be precise. These two were developing feelings for me. I knew the signs when I saw them, plus having desire was a bit of a cheat, though I'd like to think I would have picked up the signs even without it. Still though, this was happening a lot faster than I had anticipated, though I wasn't sure if they themselves were quite sure of how they felt just yet. Hopefully this tension didn't build into something negative between them. Still though, how was I going to handle this? Ever since that fortune-telling elf from Dworgen had shown me my potential future, I'd been wondering how I was going to go about all of this. If I was going to be akin to the protagonist of a harem story, then there was one thing I wanted to avoid at all costs. Not being dense. Now this may seem silly, and it kinda was, but as someone who'd read and watched a lot of harem manga and anime, it was always a bit disappointing to see the protagonist not be aware of how those around him felt, even in the most obvious of scenarios. It always ticked me off, and to some extent, I even pitted the girls, especially those scenarios where they managed to confess, but some trope would make the MC forget or not hear the confession. Those ones were just the worst. So I vowed I would not be that guy. I'd be aware of their feelings and acknowledge them. I'd rather build genuine connections with the women in my life, rather than just amassing a harem. Hence the reason I was taking the time to know the princess and purple-haired ogress. I had centuries ahead of me if what great sage told me was true, so there was no real need to hurry things too much. All right, you two, cut it out. This trip won't be any fun if you're just going to fight the entire time, I said as I walked up to them. I wouldn't act on my knowledge just yet. Not until they were sure of their feelings, and I was positive of my own. Lord Rimuru is right. Regardless of the reason, he has invited us with him on his day off. The least we can do is be on our best behavior, the young master added, instantly causing the two girls to stop quarreling and bow their heads towards me in guilt. Please forgive us. We'll be on our best behavior from here on, they said in unison. It was almost like they had practiced this, because given their almost opposing personalities, it was rather unlikely that they would do so coincidentally. Don't worry about it. We're all supposed to be taking this day to have fun and relax, so you don't need to be so uptight, I said to the ogresses before also turning to the young master to let him know I was referring to him as well. That goes for your friend in the trees as well, I said as I turned towards one of the trees to my left. The ogre had been very well hidden, probably using hide form to conceal his presence. But my sensory skills were now at a level where I could even detect the elder whilst he used the same technique. Compared to that, sensing him was easier, though I did have to admit that he was more skilled with the skill than most in the village. A few seconds later, the culprit suddenly appeared on the ground before me on one knee, head bowed down. As I suspected, It was the blue-haired ogre that I usually saw hanging around the young master. From what I had gathered, the two were longtime friends. In fact, all four of the present ogres were quite close and had grown up together from what the princess had told me. Forgive my rudeness, my lord. I did not mean to conceal my presence from you, the blue-haired ogre said with his head down. Honestly, these guys apologized over the most silliest of things. It's fine. Are you coming with us as well? I asked him. I didn't remember the chief saying anything about him tagging along as well. But at this point, it would be pretty rude not to invite him. I'm afraid not. I still have duties to attend to within the village. The ogre responded. Well, now that wouldn't do now, would it? All his friends were taking a day off, and he was stuck at work? Nope, that didn't seem fair at all. Well, forget that. You might as well come with us now, I said casually, causing the blue ogre to raise his head in minor surprise. Don't worry about the chief. I'll take the fall if anything comes up, I reassured with a grin and a thumbs up. But my lord, I couldn't, he said hesitantly. If it bothers you that much, just think of it as escorting the princess and young master. After all, I'm sure the chief would appreciate an extra pair of eyes on them outside the village walls. I reassured him. If you just happen to be having fun with your friends whilst fulfilling your duty, I don't think he will fault you for it. The young master then walked up to his friend and put a hand on the blue-haired ogre's shoulder. It would be rude to continuously decline such a generous offer from Lord Rimuru, he said with a grin. Besides, he said he would speak to father on your behalf, so you shouldn't make him keep repeating himself. That seemed to get the blue-haired ogre to actually consider things, before he let out a sigh of resignation before nodding his head as a sign that he would come along. This guy takes his job way too seriously. I couldn't help but think, hopefully the young master could get him to relax at some point. Last thing I needed was another stiff guy hanging around, much like what had happened with Rigger at the elf club. All right then, seems that everyone is here and ready to go. Ranga, do you mind calling in the others now? The four ogres were confused as to what I meant by that. As you wish, master. The unspoken question was answered as Ranga's shadow lengthened, and not a second later, 3 Tempest wolves leapt out and landed right in front of me, their heads lowered respectfully. The place we're going is a bit far from the village, but with the Tempest wolves, we should be able to make it there and back, while still having plenty of time to relax and enjoy ourselves. I explained to the ogres whose interest seemed piqued upon the appearance of the wolves. I see, but my lord, I only count 3 wolves, for including Ranga, the young master pointed out. Yeah, originally I had planned for the 2 of us to ride Ranga, since he can carry 2 of us when fully grown, I said as I gestured towards the purple-haired ogress, her face lighting up at the idea. But when the chief suggested bringing you 2 along, I had Ranga fetch 3 wolves from the goblin village. I hadn't accounted for another person. I trailed as I turned towards the blue-haired ogre. Then perhaps it would be best if I dash. This shouldn't be an issue, though. I cut off the blue-haired ogre before he could start again. As I said, Ranga is capable of carrying 2 of us at full size. So if there are no complaints, the princess can ride with me, I suggested. This time it was the princess' face that lit up like a Christmas tree. I don't think anyone here would object to that, Lord Rimuru. Right, big brother? The princess asked with a terrifying smile as she turned towards the young master. I didn't envy him at that moment. All right, no arguments here. Ranga and Lord Rimuru are probably the most qualified to protect you. Young master responded quickly, a bit of sweat dripping down the side of his head. Now I understood what the chiefess meant when she told me the princess was the only one outside of the chief, an elder, who could keep the redhead in line. She had him whipped good. Smash. All heads swiftly turned in the direction the sound had come from, and were surprised to see that the purple ogress had punched one of the nearby trees, leaving a sizable dent and numerous cracks that seemed to be expanding by the second. Are you okay? I asked, wondering what had brought this on all of a sudden. I was supposed to be the one, she stated between breaths. Though with her head down, I couldn't quite see her expression, though I could sense the envy and rage bubbling within her. I was the one who was supposed to ride with Lord Rimuru, she shouted as her head snapped up and glared at the princess with tears gathering in the corner of her eyes, cheeks pouted and puffed like balloons. I couldn't even find the words. The young master and blue-haired ogre merely sighed as though they were used to this, which they probably were given that they grew up together. Still though, the last thing I expected her to make a fuss about was this. I thought to myself with a deadpan. Earlier you said that I was going to ride with you. But now that the princess is here, you want to go with her? The purple ogress shouted as she pointed at the princess with an accusatory finger. You're making a bigger deal out of this than it actually is. It's just a small trip. It's not like the princess and I are running away together and Ranga is the noble steed. I said, the princess suddenly blushing at the potential image of the idea. Besides, it makes sense for the princess to ride with me given her smaller stature. Plus Ranga is the only one large enough to carry two of us. The purple ogress pouted, arms crossed, and everything. She really was throwing a tantrum like a child at this point. I knew she wouldn't let this go easily. I had to find a way to placate her quickly so we could go while the sun was still out. Last thing I needed was her knocking down every tree within the surrounding area that might actually draw the dryads here. Look, for the sake of progress, I'll ride with the princess today. Ranga and I are literally always here, so we can ride together anytime. I tried to reassure her. The pouting didn't stop, but she seemed to be contemplating my words. Now I just needed to hammer the point home. Besides, the more time we spend here arguing, the less time we'll have to actually enjoy the day. I added. From the corner of my eye, I saw the young master approach us with a rather strict expression on his face. Lord Rimuru is right. Again, do I need to remind you that this is his day off and he invited all of us to accompany him? The young master added with a disapproving glare that caused the purple ogress to flinch. Besides, Ranga is the strongest of the Tempest wolves. It only makes sense that my sister, who is younger and less experienced than the rest of us, sticks with him and Lord Rimuru. The purple ogress still pouted but ultimately relented. She'd get over it quickly enough. Her childlike mindset meant she didn't keep grudges for long. Maybe this outing would help her get over it quickly. With the arrangements set and the purple ogress temporarily placated, we finally set out on the Tempest wolves. Riding on Ranga as he dashed through the trees of the forest was one of the things I found to enjoy, almost as much as I did flying. Just the feeling of the wind rushing against your face and everything else around you becoming a blur. It was a surreal experience that often got my blood pumping and had me excited, which is why I was glad I got to share this experience with the ogres. Despite the Tempest wolves not moving at their max speed, I could tell the ogres were actually enjoying the experience. Well, at least the young master and purple ogress were. The blue-haired ogre seemed unfazed both outwardly and emotionally, and the princess seemed to have other things in mind as she clung onto me. I decided that I didn't want to know what it was that had her so flustered and embarrassed, but I could probably guess. It didn't take us long to arrive at our destination, a wide clearing with a river flowing right through the middle. It was spacious, quiet, and almost tranquil. Through magic sense, I could tell there were no monsters within the nearby area, which was weird, since animals usually gathered where there was water. There was only one possible explanation. Ranga, did you clear the surrounding area of wildlife? I asked the alpha Tempest wolf. The proud bark and wagging of his tail were enough of an answer for me. No, though I did send a request to Raya to clear this area so that Master would be able to enjoy his day without disturbance. Ranga said proudly. So it was his idea. A wise decision, ensuring that the terrain is secure before bringing your master. Your intelligence continues to astound me, Sir Ranga, the young master said, to which even the blue-haired ogre nodded his head, equally impressed, as we all dismounted from the wolves. I guess having a beast like monster displaying such high levels of intelligence wasn't common. The Tempest wolves had really come a long way since I named them. Sir Ranga truly is amazing. He's powerful, agile, intelligent, and loyal, a truly remarkable monster. Not to mention his fur is so soft. I can see why the children of our village are so fond of him, with the same extending to your dragon form. The princess exclaims in amazement as she stepped up to the large wolf and began to rub the back of his ears, prompting the wolf to yelp appreciatively as its tail wagged and it started panting. Hearing this reminded me of how much attention Ranga and I drew from the ogre village after my return. At first, people had been wary of Ranga, even though I vouched for him as my familiar and he had shown his loyalty to me. I suspected it was because Ranga had a powerful presence to him due to being a monster of higher rank and magicules compared to all the ogres. Surprisingly, it had been the ogre children that had warmed up to Ranga first, probably out of curiosity, and most likely against the wishes of their parents. The children would constantly look at Ranga with awe and amazement due to his strength, size, and loving the feeling of his fur. Ranga also enjoyed the attention he received from the children and was more than happy to play with them, allowing them to pet him, much to their happiness. Seeing this, the rest of the ogres were quick to let go of their hesitations and began to treat Ranga well. Naturally, my dragon form was also another thing that drew the attention of the ogres. Much like with the goblins, it was mainly the female population and children that were drawn in by this form. The one difference was that the ogres were strong when compared to the goblins and elves. Escaping the grip of the purple-haired ogress and chiefess was a battle worth remembering. I didn't even know the chiefess had such a fearsome grip. I was now very conscious of where I transformed and whose presence I was in because of that. Yes, Ranga is indeed a very reliable partner, the purple-haired ogress said with a proud smile. Why are you beaming with pride? He's not your partner. I couldn't help but think with a deadpan. Seriously, it was hard to know how this girl thought at times. Then again, that aloof nature was also one of her charms in a way. The wind in the area suddenly kicked up as Ranga's tail began to rotate at rapid speeds, comparable to a propeller. The ogres were forced to cover their eyes and hold down their clothing as the torrent of wind continued to increase in pressure and intensity. I quickly stepped in and bopped Ranga on the head, which immediately calmed Ranga down. Sorry about that. It seems Ranga got a bit flustered over all the praise and compliments. You should be careful when showering him with so much praise at once, I said with a grin as Ranga turned his head away from the group in embarrassment, prompting a few of us to laugh at seeing the strong alpha wolf get all flustered. With that, we settled into the clearing. The princess and purple ogress decided to go into the forest to get some herbs and berries to go together with the fish, leaving us guys to do the actual fishing, just in case I had Ranga hide within the princess's shadow. All right then, boys, how about we throw in a wager? I said as we each sat by the riverbed, fishing rods in hand. The two ogres looked at each other for a second before turning back to me anxiously. It's simple. Whoever catches the most fish by the time the girls return is the winner, I said with a grin. What about the other two? The blue-haired ogre asked cautiously. Well, the middle man doesn't really get anything, but the guy in last, well. I couldn't help the sinister chuckle that escaped from my mouth, and the way the two ogres became that much more alert made it worth it. The person to catch the least fish will have to take a quarter of her food from each of our plates into their own, I said with a sinister laugh as the other two ogres shuddered at the idea. They knew I was referring to the purple ogress. While her cooking had gotten a lot better to the point of not giving off the aura of a high-rank monster, or burning through the ground like acid, she still had some ways to go before it started tasting good or started to look presentable. Still, the good news is I wasn't the only one chipping in to actually try and teach her now. The princess, along with a few other female ogres, were also lending a hand, despite the few disasters that had occurred. It was a good thing, though. The purple ogress was finally getting the guidance she needed from her kin. Me teaching her at this point was just an excuse for us to spend time together at this point, though I'm sure she still believed I had much to teach her, even though my culinary skills were mediocre at best. Lord Rimuru, you are evil, sir, the young master said as a wave of dread washed over him at the implications of eating her food. Even the blue-haired ogre seemed unnerved by the consequences of loss. I couldn't help the laughter that roared out of me from that response. Oh, come on. Her cooking is nowhere near as bad as it used to be. I would know. The pain I felt that first experience despite my pain nullification was something that I wouldn't forget anytime soon. Besides, it keeps things interesting, does it not? Still, it was actually kind of funny to see the young master like this, being his real and genuine self, unlike how he had been towards me before I left. To further spice things up, the loser has to give up half of the food they receive from the princess to the winner, I add, which gets their attention since, unlike the purple ogress, the cooking of the ogre princess was among the best in the village. There was a time where I doubted the two of us would ever be on good terms. The grudge he seemed to hold against me for no apparent reason was something I could feel from a mile away. What happened on the day I left the village was merely an explosion of all that pent-up frustration. But now things had cleared up a bit since my return to the village. Flashback. The atmosphere in the room seemed kind of tense, and that was putting it mildly. The princess had told me that my presence had been requested by the chief, along with his council. Sure enough, upon my arrival, I saw both the royal family, the elder and the village council members waiting for me. Everybody seemed nervous and tense for some reason. The princess wordlessly guided me towards the table where the chief was seated, and I sat on the opposing side. Lord Rimuru, thank you for gracing us with your presence, the chief said as he bowed his head, an action that was promptly copied by all present within the room. What the hell is going on here? They were laying the whole royal treatment act rather thick right now. Were they going to ask for some kind of favor? Is something the matter? You all seem rather tense. Not exactly. We simply wish to address a matter we feel has been left unaddressed since your departure, the chief said as he raised his head. He turned towards his son, seeming to be ashamed and a bit upset at the young redhead. My son was highly disrespectful towards you on the day that you departed from our village, going so far as to insult and point his blade towards you, an honored guest of our village. Ah, so that's what this was about. It certainly explained why everyone seemed so tense and uncomfortable. They were probably expecting me to be angry with what the young master had said and done that day. To be honest, it did upset me more than I was willing to admit. The young master had been a source of frustration for me since the first time we met in the forest when I first encountered the ogres. He had made up his mind about me since before he even laid his eyes on me, and since then, he had been fixated on the idea that I was the bad guy. And with a skill like desire, I'd been able to feel all the anger, spite, and other negative emotions he sent my way. That was honestly what pissed me most about this situation with him. It certainly made it hard for me to feel relaxed at times, even within the boundaries of village. I see, so that's what this is about. I let out a sigh as I thought about how I was going to handle this. I didn't want the ogres to see me as some kind of pushover, especially now that they knew of my race and heritage. I had to be a bit tough right now, and then balance it out with some compassion to overshadow it. Lord Rimuru, please allow me to apologize for my foolish son's behavior. As chief, I am ashamed that I let our honored guest go through something like that in my presence, and as a father, I am ashamed by his behavior, the chief said with another bow. Please rest assured he has been properly punished for his behavior. The chief seemed genuine, and so did everyone else in the room if their anxiety was anything to go by. But at the end of the day, they weren't the ones that wronged me, and so I turned my attention away from them and instead focused on the young master, whose head was also down in shame and regret. Please don't take offense to this, chief, but you weren't the one that wronged me. An apology from you is pointless, I said, voice even and expression void of any emotion. My eyes met that of the redhead, and I raised my hand and pointed it towards him. If anything, I want to hear it from him, I added, the people in the room flinching at the last part. I hadn't meant for it to come out that hard, but it seemed even I had some bottled up stuff when it came to the young master of the ogres. The chief turned to his son and nodded his head, the young master nodding back in return. He seemed a bit hesitant, but more than that, he also had a look of resolve in his eyes. The young master stood from his seat and made his way towards me before stopping at my right side. For a moment, I thought he was going to try something, but I was quickly proved wrong when the prideful young master of the ogres went down on both knees, before leaning forward until his head was on the ground, prostrating himself in front of everyone. I was beyond shocked. Even the chief and his family were shocked, meaning they had no idea this is what he would do. They probably assumed he would go down on one knee and bow his head as he apologized. I wasn't sure if the ogres knew what a Dajiza was, but given how much of their culture seemed similar to that of traditional Japanese, then they most likely understood the significance of such an action. In traditional Japanese culture, the act of prostrating yourself as the young master had done was called Dajiza. It was used to show deference to a person of higher status, as a deep apology, or to express the desire for a favor from said person. The fact that the young master was going this far. Lord Rimuru, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. Not after how I have wronged you time and time again since you came to our village, the young master started. But allow me to apologize for my foolishness. I won't make excuses for my behavior, and I'm willing to accept any punishment you may have for me, he added. He's serious? I didn't know what had happened in my absence, but for the redhead to be bowing his head to me all of a sudden. It was a complete reverse of the behavior he had shown before I left. The chief had mentioned something about a punishment earlier, perhaps that had something to do with his rehabilitation. Or maybe he was just changing character because of my heritage. One thing was for sure, though. He was being sincere right now, that much I could tell. I didn't even need to use my skills to confirm that. What exactly was his punishment? I asked the chief, curious as to how harsh they had been. We revoked his right to wield the sword for the foreseeable future. We thought it would be best to wait for your return before deciding stricter punishment. The chief responded. I see. They were trying to appease me. That much had become clear to me. Maybe they were hoping that I wouldn't hold the young master's actions against the entire village or something. If that had been the case, I never would have come back. That aside, the punishment the young master got wasn't as severe as I thought it would be. Then again, if he wasn't allowed to hold a sword, he couldn't train or improve his swordsmanship. Must have been rough for someone as prideful as him. One of the unique skills I possess is called desire. It allows me to sense the emotions and intentions of all those around me. It's useful for detecting things such as negative emotions and evil intentions, and also good for getting a general idea about a person. I started as everyone gasped and all eyes in the room widened. The elders seemed intrigued. I ignored all them and kept my eyes on the young master who still had his head bowed on the ground. Lift your head. The young master did so, knowing that I was talking to him. He sat up straight and met my eyes. I'll be honest, your attitude towards me irked me. But more than that, it was the amount of anger, hatred, and envy that I felt directed towards me that annoyed me. Even when you thought I didn't know, I did. Every glare you shot behind my back, and every curse you uttered when you thought I wasn't within earshot. I said, voice low, as the young master's eyes widened before looking down in shame. Everyone else seemed equally surprised by my words. As a dragon, my sense of hearing and smell are far sharper than what you'd normally expect, greater than wrong is even. I won't ask for your reasoning. It makes little difference now, and I doubt it would justify anything. But I want you to know I liked every aspect of this village. From the people, the hospitality, and even the connections I built here. The only thing that prevented me from truly feeling at home was you. I maintained a neutral expression as I spoke, but I'm pretty sure there was some underlying anger in the way that I spoke. I could see the worried gazes of the chiefess and princess looking between me and the young master. The elder and chief patiently waiting to hear whatever I had to say. Guess they had been expecting me to also air out my grievances. The rest of the council members just looked a bit nervous, but they didn't dare speak out. As the first son of the chief, you weren't someone I could just ignore, and our paths were bound to cross more often than not the longer I stayed within the village. Meaning as long as things stayed the way they were between us, I would never have been able to find any peace. On the day I left the village, I let you vent because I hoped to actually get to the root of the issue. But I never actually expected you to draw and point your blade at me, I said, as my eyes narrowed and a fraction of my aura began to leak out. Many within the room began to sweat even more. I didn't dare look towards the royal family or elder, instead keeping my eye on the young master. I may not have voiced my own thoughts that day, given I had more pressing matters. But I want you to know, had your sister not stepped in when she did, I more than likely would have killed you. Most of the ogres in the room tensed up immediately when I said that. My lord, I raised my hand to prevent the chief from speaking further. This was between the young master and I for now. They called me here to address the issue cause they felt I'd been wronged. The least they could do was listen. While it may have seemed otherwise, my own tolerance was reaching its limit. And with the amount of malice I felt coming from you in that moment, I saw you as nothing more than a threat. I also had doubts about there being a chance of reconciliation. The young master kept his eyes on the ground, not daring to meet my gaze once more, which might actually have been a good thing. I would have preferred things not come to this. As the next chief of this village, I would rather we become friends rather than enemies. A bad relationship between the two of us would ultimately mean severing ties with this place upon you becoming chief. The young master's head snapped back up in alarm at my words. No, I mean such drastic measures won't be necessary, my lord, the young master said as he bowed his head quickly once he realized he had raised his voice. I'd hope not, because as I've said multiple times, I'm rather fond of this place and its people. Even I would be disappointed if I had to cut ties, I said with a frown, the ogres present letting out breaths of relief upon hearing that. These people had been the first to welcome me after I left my mother's cave. Since starting my new life in this world, this place was the closest thing I had to a home in this world. It would be a bummer to throw it all away. For that reason, I'm willing to pardon you. Just this once, I said with a grin, much to the shock of everyone in the room. What? The young master shouted as he looked at me, just as surprised as everyone else, perhaps even more so seeing as he was the guilty party. My lord, are you not being too lenient? The chief asked me. I'm not. He's still going to get punished, just not as harsh as it would have been. I responded. The reason being I can tell that he is remorseful and regrets what he did. I sensed no deceit or malice from him the entire time. If not for that, then I would have been more severe. But it would be wise to remember that not all Magen are as tolerant as me. And I won't be generous enough to let something like that go a second time, I added, turning towards the young master when I issued that warning. Thank you for your kindness, my lord, he said with the bow of his head. Sure. Hopefully with this the relationship between the master and I could change for the better. Have you decided on the punishment you're going to give him? The chief asked. Indeed. The princess and I, along with a few other female ogres, have been assisting the purple ogress in improving her cooking skills, and while we still have a long way to go, her food at least isn't as dangerous or poisonous as before. But she will still need someone to taste her food as she gradually improves, I said while looking at the now sweating and horrified young master with a devious smirk. And lucky for her, she now has a new volunteer. The chief, the elder, and his council couldn't help but pity the young master due to knowing the infamous nature of her cooking, though they were at least grateful that I wouldn't kill him. But whether or not the purple ogress would unintentionally kill him or not was another question. Flashback end. After that meeting, things were a bit awkward between the young master and I for the first few days, but we eventually started getting along just fine, mostly bonding over how terrible the purple-haired ogress is cooking, though we made sure not to talk in her presence. I managed to convince the chief to also return the young master's sword since eating that food was already punishment in itself. So the young master was back to practicing the sword once more under the elder, with the two of us occasionally sparring when the opportunity allowed. Back to our fishing expedition. Time flew by faster than I had thought, the girls and Ranga having returned some time back, and were cooking the fish. I would have been there helping watch over the purple ogress as she cooked, but the princess insisted that she'd keep an eye on her. Something about me enjoying myself and relaxing. In the end, I merely shrugged and returned to chatting with the young master and blue ogre. The winner of our little bet turned out to be the blue-haired ogre, much to my dismay. The guy had the luck and patience of a saint. I probably would have been more lucky if I had great sage guide me, but I wanted a clean victory. Fortunately, I came second, meaning while I had to give away some of my goods, I also had to give away some of my bads. It was the kind of middle ground I was willing to settle for even if I didn't like it that much. It was better than what the young master was going to go through. He showed a surprising amount of self-restraint and patience whilst we were fishing, but still fell a little short of what was required for this activity, and thus caught the least fish and ended up in last place, much to his dismay and my amusement. How did it come to this? The young master asked as he looked at the bowl of food in front. I couldn't help but pity him a bit. His plate a lot more full than mine since the blue-haired ogre and I were quick to give him a small portion. You lost, now man up. I told him bluntly as I gave him a pat on the back before looking down at my own bowl which, while less, was not appealing. The purple ogress had improved, but that was only in that her food wasn't monstrous or deadly as it used to be. Heck, what she served back then couldn't be called food. But now, her dishes were just poorly cooked with a bad taste and smell that would have a normal human constantly running to the toilet for weeks. Go ahead and eat up before it gets cold, the purple ogress said with a smile, as the princess looked on with pity from behind her. Given that she was still preparing her own dish, she had been spared from what we were about to suffer. Our only saving grace in this moment was that the princess had prevented the purple ogress from cooking too much food, only making just enough for our 3 bowls. The reason being they wanted to bring most of the fish back to the village to share with others. I suppose we got lucky in that regard. I don't know if I would have been able to take a second helping. Down the hatch it goes, I mumbled as I braced myself, as I took the spoon full and shoved it into my mouth. The taste was not pleasant at all, and I had to resist the urge to spit it out. But compared to the first dish I ate long ago, this meal was a lot more tolerable. All I had to do was chug it down before the taste filled my mouth and the stench went up my nose. Something that the purple ogress apparently mistook for me liking her dish. How can she not see my suffering? Honesty, I shouldn't be surprised at this point. This girl had gone her whole life without even realizing people didn't like her cooking until I made her face that harsh reality. Looking at the blue ogre and the young master, I could instantly tell the latter was struggling due to the way his face was turning blue with each spoonful. The blue ogre seemed to be handling himself slightly better, most likely adopting the same strategy one had, but he did wince here and there. The fact that they could even eat this dish without immediately falling sick was a testament to how far the purple ogress had come. The first time the young master ate her dish for the sake of his punishment, he was almost choked to death on the spot. Though he did acquire poison resistance, so I guess something good came out of it. All right, everyone, why don't you try mine next? The princess called out as she came with a wooden tray that had 5 bowls and cups of tea as well. The male ogres and myself instantly pushed our current plates away. I even prepared some tea. The princess said as she served the plates and cups for everyone, including the purple ogress and herself. Just looking at the food and the aroma that filled my sensitive nose were enough to make my mouth get all watery. I knew the princess was a talented cook, but I didn't know she was good with fish as well. I needed to give these ogres more credit. Despite the lack of ingredients here compared to the village, the princess had managed to put together a spectacular meal that I could never hope to create on my own. Enduring the previous meal may have been worth it for this taste of heaven. Of course, I didn't forget about the bet. The blue-haired ogre, being the winner who caught the most fish, was supposed to get a quarter from mine and the young master's plate. And so, reluctantly, I held up my end of the deal like a man. It was a shame, but in the end it was my loss. Not to mention, I was the one who suggested the bet in the first place. The girls merely laughed at the interaction, especially at the expense of the young master and myself. And soon we were all just talking and laughing as we ate, chatting about pretty much anything that came to mind, whilst making sure to avoid any serious topics. Today was supposed to be a day of relaxation after all, and I couldn't help but feel we had somewhat succeeded in doing just that. And yet, even in this moment, I couldn't help but feel that this was merely the calm before the storm, that something big was about to happen. Lord Rimuru? I was snapped out of my thoughts when I heard the young master calling me. Actually, it seemed everyone had turned towards me with expressions of minor concern. Are you all right, my lord? Did I worry you guys? I asked as I waved my hands dismissively. I just had something on my mind, so don't worry about me. The 4 ogres seemed to accept that answer as they smiled once more and began to converse and eat once more, with me actively participating. That's right, there was no point in overthinking anything right now. If something happened, then I would deal with it. That was my job as guardian. Chapter 14, Ifrit, the corrupted fire spirit. Third POV. Having recently returned from the puppet nation of Gistav at the summons of his lord and master, Jelmud was more than eager to carry out the task he had been assigned. It had taken him some time to track them down again, the human party that consisted of 2 heroes and 3 adventurers. But after some time, he did indeed find them again. They had entered much deeper into the forest in the 4 days that he had been gone. It was surprising that they still seemed to be in one piece. Then again, 2 of them were of the hero class, so it made sense that they had managed to make it this far. Still, for a group that was within the depths of a monster territory, they seemed rather relaxed. Especially those 3 adventurers, they were being far too carefree in enemy territory. But Jelmud didn't care about those 3. As far as he could tell, there was nothing special about them. No, his targets were the 2 heroes in the party, the rising hero, Masayuki Hanju, and the conqueror of flames, Shizue Aizawa. He had been given orders by Lord Clayman to keep tabs on this group and wait for the right opportunity to execute the orders he had been given. Jelmud took a dark purple orb out of his pocket, an eerie glow coming from it, and an aura that would unnerve most people. Lord Clayman had given this to him with simple instructions. Wait for the right opportunity, and when it comes, use this item on the flame hero, Shizue. Those had been his instructions, but it was the words after that had truly caught his attention. This will likely attract the attention of the Majin you spoke of. Observe the chaos that unfolds and report back anything of note. Gelmyu didn't understand what his master meant by all that, but one thing was for sure. Once he used this orb, a lot of chaos was going to unfold. Lord Clayman wanted the corpses of the two heroes to be as undamaged as possible so he could turn them both into his puppets, and if possible, the capture of the Majin as well. Personally, Gelmyu wanted the Majin to die in whatever chaos his master intended to create. He still hadn't gotten over the humiliation he had faced at being forced to flee like some coward. But even if by some miracle the Majin did survive, that would only make him a primary target for when he invaded the forest. He had far more power than the numerous seeds he had planted throughout the forest, and so would serve as good fodder for the Orc Lord. But for now, he would focus on the task that he had been assigned. Ogre Village, Rimuru POV. It was early morning in the forest, and as they did every day, the ogres were currently training in the clearing not too far from their village. The elder and I were standing by the edge of the clearing, watching over one of the sparring sessions that was taking place. It was a 3 versus 1 spar between the young master along with 2 other ogres against Ranga on his own. While it may seem a bit unfair at first glance, Ranga had already proven himself to be stronger than all the ogres, but given that he was A rank, even if it was on the lower end, the difference in strength wasn't that much of a surprise. The main reason Ranga had been training with the ogres recently was to practice the arts and skills I had been helping him grasp. Things had been coming along nicely in that regard, but now I was more worried about his application rather than just his arsenal of skills and abilities, hence the reason I was having him spar with the ogres. It was something Ranga would need to learn in order to fight both effectively and tactically. The ogres had been more than willing to agree to be his sparring partners, wanting to test their own strength against Ranga, though they quickly learned that challenging him one-on-one was foolish. While Ranga may not be of the same intellectual level as them, he was still stronger than them, his strength reflecting his superior rank. The 3 ogres currently had Ranga surrounded from 3 angles, forming a triangle, their blades drawn and ready to attack. Ranga stood in the center, standing at full height as he easily towered over the 3 ogres, yellow lightning crackling around his body as he snarled at the young master, who stood in front of him while keeping his senses aware of the other 2. Without warning, Ranga howled into the sky as lightning erupted around him and shot towards the 3 ogres. This was one of the new lightning-based skills I'd taught him based on the Pokemon anime, Discharge. It was a simple yet effective wide-area technique that was useful in situations where you were outnumbered such as this. Unfortunately, its range was still a bit limited, but I figured Ranga would be able to fix that with time and practice. The young master and Ogre 1, and because I'm too lazy to describe them all, managed to successfully evade the attack, but Ogre 2 took the attack head-on. His only saving grace being that due to the dispersing nature of the attack, it lacked offensive ability. Besides, Ranga was holding back some. Still, the attack was more than enough to make him cook a little, Ogre 2's expression being all dopey before he fell and passed out. Taking advantage of the confusion, Ranga charged towards Ogre 1, body surrounded by lightning. It was another skill I'd taught him called Wild Charge. Just like the Pokemon version, Ranga would coat himself in lightning before charging at his opponent and ramming into them. He was also faster and more agile while using this technique. So imagine my surprise when the young master actually managed to intercept Ranga, getting between the wolf and Ogre 1 with his sword blazing with crimson flames, before dashing forward to intercept Ranga. It was good to see the ogres making good use of the magisteel weapons. One such weapon was the one the young master was wielding right now. This katana was one of few 100% magisteel weapons that Kaijin had created, with the assistance of some ogre blacksmiths, with my own sword being the only other thus far. Most of the weapons he made were 20 to 50% magisteel, with other materials mixed in such as metal. These were the ones that were passed along to the other ogres. That was because 100% magisteel weapons were extremely valuable, due to their potential to grow into legendary or even god-class weapons in the hands of the right wielder by absorbing magicules from the user at a faster rate than their lesser counterparts. I'd given the young master this sword as a gift, and because I felt he had the most potential in the village. That being said, there were still a few more notable individuals within the village that I was considering also doing the same for. Back to the fight. The flaming sword clashed with the lightning-coated form of Ranga. The young master surprised me further by actually holding his ground in the face of Ranga's blunt force attack. While his attack had failed to damage the Tempest Wolf, he still managed to make it out with minor burns from the frantic lightning that surrounded Ranga. He's actually holding himself quite well. That new sword seems to suit him well too. I commented as I watched the young master and Ogre 2 clash with Ranga once more. Yes, but I fear he may grow a bit complacent with that sword granting him more power than he had access to before. The elder responded with a thoughtful hum as he stroked his beard. I don't think that will be an issue. The weapon grows alongside the user, meaning it's only as strong as he is. Not to mention, even with his weapon, he still can't match you in swordsmanship. I said with a grin at the elder's concern. I wasn't really worried about the redhead turning back to his old, arrogant ways. I'm pretty sure he had already learned his lesson after what happened with me. I also think that's why he's been requesting to spar with Ranga lately. He knows he's not as strong as he believed and is looking to improve himself. All this new weapon did is help him channel his inner power. Perhaps you're right, Lord Rimuru. Maybe this old man really is worrying for no reason. The elder said as he closed his eyes and a smile appeared on his face. He's changed quite a bit since you left the village. It's something both his father and I noticed. At first we were concerned, but perhaps it was for the best. I heard from the princess that he had even lost the trust of the people at some point. The elder nodded his head in agreement, his face looking solemn. Word about his provocations and actions towards you on that day spread around the village despite the chief ordering otherwise. The elder said with a sigh. Once word got around of his insults and the fact that he pointed his blade at you, many speculated that you had left the village because of him. Others simply started doubting him as they wondered why he would provoke one as powerful as yourself. The news of you being Lady Viridia's heir, which spread around the same time, certainly didn't make things any easier. It was that bad, huh? I said with a sweat drop at the impact I'd indirectly had. Still, the young master had been the one to bring it on himself. Things wouldn't have escalated that far if he had just been willing to talk. He lost the faith of the people as the next chief, as many believed he had cost us a valuable ally and made an enemy out of you. The elder explained. I guess I could understand the perspective of the other ogres. While strength was important to lead, so too was wisdom. In their eyes, the young master had done something which could have spelled their doom or cost them greatly. Learning of my heritage only made them that much more afraid of how I would retaliate against the offense. It certainly explained the overly warm reception I had gotten upon my arrival. But it seems that experience has made him grow. He was humbled more than anything. Now he's trying to both improve himself and regain the trust he lost. The elder said, at the very least, he seems to have the trust of your warriors. I pointed out, the few times since my return that I had joined the hunting party, I had noticed that they seemed slightly closer than when I had left, the young master interacting with them more. Yes, as the ones who interact with him most, they are the ones who've witnessed his change the most. That has also helped in improving his image. The elder said before he turned to me. The other thing that helped was the rumors of you looking past his deeds as well and having his sword returned. Is that so? At this point, I shouldn't even be surprised anymore. But still, I was glad the young master wasn't receiving as much lip for something I had even forgotten about whilst I was outside the village. However, I genuinely feel he needed to experience something like this, to help him understand that he can't make light of his actions, especially as the future village chief. The elder said, and I couldn't help but nod in agreement. The redhead's words may as well be the words of the village. It was one of the reasons why I wanted to get along with him. My relations with him would determine my relations with this village in the future, heck to some extent even now. Watching as the sparring session continued for a while longer, the young master was eventually left as the last one standing, the other ogre having been injured to the point of being unable to continue. The young master himself was injured and tired, covered in cuts, burns, and bruises, his magicule levels low, but despite all of that, he was still standing, holding his blade with both hands as his eyes met Ranga's with a challenging glare. Ranga himself, aside from sporting a few injuries, was mostly unscathed, which didn't come as much of a surprise. Still, it was surprising that they had managed to land a hit on him at all, given his superior strength and senses. That's enough. I called out as the elder, and I walked down towards the four of them. Ranga immediately stopped growling, turning towards me and sitting on his hind legs, tail wagging in excitement as I approached. Looking at the three ogres, the other two having regained consciousness, they really did look beaten up. Greater heal, I shouted with a stretched out hand, the green glow of my healing magic surrounding the three ogres before they were fully healed of their injuries. Great Sage had surprised me back in Dworgen when it told me it had fully analyzed the properties of the Hippocute herb and the full potions it made, and it even managed to replicate those healing abilities into a magic art for me to use. The best part about Greater Heal was that despite its powerful healing capabilities, which were similar to that of a full potion, the spell in itself was not very costly on my magicules, meaning I could cast it consecutively or on a wide scale if need be. Thank you, Lord Rimuru. The young master and his comrades shouted in gratitude as they bowed their heads. No problem. You guys sparring with Ranga also serves as training and practice for him as well. So this is mutually beneficial. I responded with a nod. But Sir Ranga is already powerful. What could he hope to gain by sparring with us? Ogre 1 asked in confusion. He had been the first to get knocked out after getting fried by Ranga's lightning, so it was understandable that he was skeptical. Ranga? I turned to the alpha of the Tempest Wolves with a raised eyebrow. I wanted to hear his response to this question since he was the one sparring with the ogres in the first place. Was he doing it simply because I told him to, or was he learning as much from the experience as he could? While it is true that I am indeed strong, that is only because Master gifted me and the rest of my kind with names, Ranga said as he stepped up beside me. This power I wield is still foreign to me, even though I've already grasped it at an instinctual level. Master has been helping me by helping me unlock skills and create arts, but I still need experience in combat, especially against other intelligent beings. This would help in refining my techniques and tactical awareness, which I hope would also make me a better leader for my people overall. We all stared wide-eyed at Ranga, while the elder merely opened a single eye with a raised eyebrow. But the point was we were all shocked by how well thought out his response was. I often forgot how the goblins weren't the only ones whose intelligence had risen since their evolutions. Great Sage had definitely mentioned something about the wolves being more capable of complex thoughts and tactics as a pack. Guess that intelligence also translated to other areas of thinking as well. Ho ho ho, well said, Sir Ranga. The elder said with a chuckle, snapping me out of my shock. I couldn't help but nod my head in agreement with the elder, scratching the Tempest Wolf behind the ear, much to his joy, if his tail wagging was any indication. Ranga had not only shown a lot more insight than I had anticipated, but had proved that he was grasping the purpose of his side of the training and was actually doing his best to maximize it, which was a good thing and made me proud in a way. Wow, that is very wise of you, Ranga. To show that type of wisdom speaks volumes of your character, and in regards to being a leader, you're already doing a much better job than your predecessor. I'm proud of you, I said, causing the Tempest Wolf to wag his tail harder at the praise, kicking up some wind, though thankfully not too hard to blow us away. That's right. Ranga had also been making occasional visits to the goblin village without me, mainly to maintain his position as alpha amongst the Tempest Wolves, but also to oversee their training and development for himself. The Tempest Wolf would never admit it, but I also had the feeling that seeing Raya was another reason he was sometimes eager to go. It wouldn't surprise me if the two were already mates, but that wasn't my business. What did concern me was the overall progress of the Tempest Wolves. According to Ranga, the pack seemed to be developing and integrating well with each other. Raya had proven herself a capable leader to stand by Ranga's side as the head of the pack in his absence. That being said, I occasionally had Ranga switch with Raya when it came to being with me here. The reason being they were the ones who had unlocked their elemental abilities. According to Great Sage, the Tempest Wolves had an affinity for wind and lightning, the males leaning more towards lightning and the females towards wind. For that reason, I'd have Ranga return to the goblin village and attempt teaching the males some of the skills I taught him, whilst trying to teach Raya while she was here. Then vice versa when they switched. This had been the routine since my return, and so far the results had been promising. It seems this morning's session is over, the elder said as he turned towards the rest of the ogre villagers to see them stopping their respective training and preparing to head back to the village. Yeah, we were just about done here ourselves, I said before turning to the young master and the other two ogres. You guys should take it easy for the day. My healing magic heals injuries, but does nothing to restore your stamina. Right? Though I doubt my father would let me slack off too much, the young master said with a sigh, causing me to snort. As I usually did after the morning session with the village, I did my own training further away from the village, further refining my arts and exploring some of the more destructive skills I had unlocked upon naming the goblins and wolves such as Black Lightning and Black Wind. I usually kept this training up for a few hours before heading back to the ogre village. I could feel that I had improved in the time since my return. I'd also looked into this storm magic I had inherited from my mother, and boy was it completely different from what I had pictured in mind. I originally thought it would be something like a fusion between water manipulation, and wind manipulation, or maybe even lightning manipulation. But no, things could not be that simple. The first time I attempted to use storm magic, a mass of black magicules exploded out of my body in every direction, destroying everything within my immediate area: trees, animals, and pretty much anything that wasn't the ground itself, leaving me standing in the middle of a sizable barren wasteland. Trainee and her siblings made an appearance not too long afterwards, and needless to say, they were not amused about the sudden amount of deforestation and loss of wildlife. I found it even more amusing that she tried to chastise me for being so reckless with my power, but then again, when I looked like a child both in dragon and human form, it kind of made sense. To make matters worse, it seemed the Dryads couldn't restore the land at the moment due to the potency of the storm magic particles in the air. In the end, it was decided that the small barren area I'd created would serve as my training ground. I was also relieved that nobody from the ogre village had been close enough to get caught in the wave. Good thing I had decided to practice these dangerous techniques far from the village. Raya, who'd been the one with me at the time of the incident, had been in my shadow when it occurred, ensuring that she was safe and unharmed. After that, I became a lot more careful whenever I practiced storm magic, starting with the smallest amount of magicules and building my way up. I already had a few ideas of how to mix this destructive magic into the fighting style I was building. Most of the techniques I had in mind were based on the Dragon Slayer magic I had seen in an anime called Fairy Tail. If I could find a way to use my storm magic in a similar manner, with my original fighting style to boot, then my close and mid-range combat capabilities would skyrocket. Lord Rimuru, I was snapped out of my thoughts by the cheerful call of none other than the ogre princess, who was standing by the edge of the wasteland I called my training ground. She was holding in her hands what appeared to be a basket. Is it already noon? I wondered as I looked up into the sky. Sure enough, the sun had already slightly passed its peak. I guess I got so into it that I didn't notice how much time had passed again. This had become another common thing. The ogres tended to bring me lunch whenever I spent too much time training on my own. I normally tried to avoid that, but on days such as today, it was easy to lose track of time once you were into it. It was usually the purple ogress or the princess who brought me this lunch, the latter usually accompanied by one other for protection. Though it seemed she had developed a habit of running off before her protective detail could escort her. You know, I somehow get the feeling that you like me more in this form, I muttered with a deadpan, as a few minutes later I found myself in my dragon form on the princess's lap as she fed me a sandwich. The two of us were under the shade of a large tree. Nonsense, my lord. I adore you regardless of what form you are in, the princess replied with a giggle, a minor blush adorning her face. Am I supposed to take that as a confession? I couldn't help but wonder. I quickly shook my head sideways. She probably didn't mean it to be a confession either, even if there was some kind of romantic intent behind that statement. That being said, I do find your baby dragon form to be adorable, the princess added with a blinding smile, as she reached for another sandwich before bringing it towards my mouth. With a sigh, I took a bite. The sandwich and juice were great, probably made by the princess herself. She certainly seemed happy and content when I said as much. By the way, did you run from your assigned guard again? I asked in an amused tone as I looked up at her teasingly. Her face instantly went red in embarrassment. Ah, well, this part of the forest isn't really that dangerous, so I'm more than capable of moving around on my own. The princess sputtered. Besides, I'm more than capable of using magic in the event that I come across a monster. And I also wanted to spend some time with you alone. I barely managed to hear the last two parts due to her voice lowering and getting fainter and fainter, and her face getting redder by the second. I was pretty sure I could see the steam coming out her ears. I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that last part, I said with a grin, deciding to play with her a little. As expected, her face went red as she lost her composure and began sputtering. And nothing. I was just saying I wish father would stop treating me as a child. The princess quickly tried to cover up, assuming that I hadn't heard her. She should know better than to underestimate the ears of a dragon, though. Right, I said in a disbelieving tone. I wasn't going to call her out on her exact words, but I'm pretty sure she got the message, if the way she turned her gaze away from me in embarrassment was any indication. The two of us settled into a comfortable silence as a gentle breeze blew past. I got comfortable in the princess's lap and laid my head down, closing my eyes. I ignored her giggles as she pet my head and brushed her hand along my back in a way that actually made me purr. I didn't even know dragons could purr. I couldn't help but wonder how much longer things would remain this peaceful within the forest. I had been pushing myself in training for the inevitable confrontation that would come from one of the surrounding nations that would try and take advantage of my mother's disappearance. But was it even enough? I still doubted I could compare to demon lords, 3 of which bordered our nation. They were the most likely to try something in order to increase their territories and power. It was typical demon lord behavior in pretty much every manga and anime. Then, there were the prospects of otherworlders and heroes from the human nations. Anyone who has read an Isekai manga knows that people summoned or reincarnated into another world usually have some kind of special power and are stronger than the average adventurers. If the surrounding kingdoms had otherworlders under them, then that might pose a problem as well if they were to attack. That being said, the thought of meeting other people from my old world was interesting, though I had to remind myself that I was a dragon now, and revealing myself to humans would more than likely get me attacked. The air shifted before the princess and me to reveal Trainee, snapping me out of my thoughts and relaxed state. Before I could ask what the elder dryad sister needed, my eyes widened in shock as I took in her condition. Trainee was down on one knee, sporting multiple burns on her body and attire. She looked tired and beaten up. Trainee, I said as I hopped off the princess and turned into my human form before running towards the dryad and kneeling beside her. Are you alright? What the heck happened to you? I asked as I immediately began to use Greater Heal on her. I wasn't sure how effective it would be on her given that her current body was spiritual in nature and not physical. That wasn't my greatest concern, however. Trainee was heavily injured, and from the looks of things, these were battle wounds. I found it hard to believe there was a monster in this forest that could lay a hand on the eldest of the Dryad sisters. Her strength stood out even amongst her sisters, and all 3 of them were stronger than the A-rank monsters I'd named thus far, with Trainee being the strongest individual I'd encountered within the forest. I was relieved to see the healing magic take effect as the burns on her body faded away. Her facial expression also seemed to relax a bit, probably from the pain receding. Once she had somewhat steadied her breathing, I spoke once more. Trainee, what happened to you? I asked, still cautious as to what could have caused the powerful dryad such harm. Trainee's eyes rose to meet my own, her face looking both worried and ashamed. A few hours ago, a fire spirit known as Ifrit had been unleashed within the forest. More than that, it seems to have been corrupted by powerful magic, making it even more powerful. My sisters and I attempted to stop its rampage, but we were unable to stop it. Trainee explained before her gaze turned downwards, unable to meet my gaze anymore. A corrupted spirit? And a fire elemental one at that. It's no wonder why Trainee and her sisters lost. I thought with a frown, dryads were tree spirits with a weakness for fire. Even if they had been evenly matched, just the affinity advantage would have been enough to ensure that this Ifrit had the upper hand. Where did this spirit even come from? I asked. An attack like this just seemed kind of sudden. About 3 weeks ago, a group of 5 adventurers ventured into the forest from the neighboring kingdom of Blumont. From what we heard, they had been sent over to investigate any changes that may have occurred within the forest due to the disappearance of Lady Viridia. 3 of them were the adventurers you first encountered as you left the sealed cave, my lord, while the other 2 are heroes from what we heard. I believe that one of the 2 heroes may have been the host of this spirit. Trainee explained as she stood up once her injuries had been fully treated, but not before bowing her head in gratitude. If these people entered the forest 3 weeks ago, then why am I only hearing about this now? I asked, mildly annoyed that she hadn't reported this to me. She said that 2 of the humans were heroes, or at least acknowledged as such by other humans. Could they be otherworlders? If so, I would have liked to scope out the situation myself before it came down to this. Please forgive me for not informing you sooner. However, I felt that you already had a lot on your plate between your training and the development of the Goblin Village, not to mention maintaining relations with the ogres. Trainee said as she cast a glance towards the princess who had been surprisingly quiet this whole time. We kept an eye on them from the moment they entered our domain, and from what we gathered, they held no ill will towards the forest and its inhabitants. They were merely completing the mission assigned to them. But it turns out we weren't the only ones watching the humans. There was a third party involved. I stated with a frown as I folded my arms over my chest, Trainee nodding her head in confirmation. This situation just kept on getting more and more complicated. The third party was none other than the magen you told us to keep an eye out for, Jelmud. Trainee said to my surprise. I remember asking Trainee and the others to look out for Jelmud after my first encounter with him. I had the feeling that guy wasn't the type to take a warning once and leave. That freak show is still in the forest. I asked, both shocked and a little pissed. Even after running away with his tail between his legs, that guy came back and was now causing me trouble. Yes, he's the one responsible for corrupting the spirit that was inside one of the heroes, causing it to break free and rampage. Trainee explained. I see. Jelmud was responsible for unleashing this spirit. Huh? Maybe I should have just killed him that first encounter. After all, he was a spy from a demon lord's nation. I shook my head sideways. I can deal with Jelmud later. For now, there's a rampaging fire spirit burning up parts of the forest. I then turned towards the princess who'd been listening attentively and was looking worried by what she heard. Princess, I need to go with Trainee to intervene and stop this fire spirit before it causes unnecessary death and destruction to the forest. In the meantime, I need you to inform your father of my departure and to warn him to keep the entire village on guard until I send word of its defeat. If this fire spirit could cause such trouble for even the dryads, then they are likely too dangerous for nearly every monster in the forest, including the ogres. Depending on the situation, I may be gone for a few days or be back by sunset. I explained. I didn't want to make it sound like I was looking down on the ogres, but if the dryads couldn't stop this spirit, then they were far outclassed. Of course, Lord Rimuru. I will let my father know immediately. Please be careful. The princess nodded in understanding of the serious urgency of the situation. I quickly had Ranga bring Raya from the goblin village to escort her back. I wasn't going to risk her being in possible danger at a time like this. Once Raya and the princess were out of sight, I turned back to Trainee, only to see her pouting on one side of her cheeks. What? I asked. It was weird to see the usually composed and cunning dryad pouting. It's nothing. The dryad quickly denied, letting me know there was something. You two seem to be getting along well, she suddenly said. It took me a second to pick up on the envy she was feeling through desire. Is now really the time to be talking about this? I asked her with a deadpan. It was easy to forget that Trainee was one of the women I had seen in the Dark Elf's crystal ball back in Dworgen. She was one of my destined ones. But because I saw her less frequently due to her duties, we hadn't really built any sort of romantic relationship. Or so I thought anyway. You're right, please forgive me, Trainee said as she shook her head sideways, her cheeks turning pink in embarrassment. I suppose I really should spend more time with Trainee and get to know her better. It's fine. Now take me to this fire spirit, I said as my draconic wings sprouted from my back. With a nod, Trainee's body burst into numerous leaves that moved fast, as if being carried by the wind. I took off into the skies, staying just above the tree line so I could follow closely. This will be my first actual combat scenario since coming into this world. Time to see if all that training actually paid off. At the speed I'd been flying, it didn't take long until it came into sight. And by it, I'm talking about the massive black smoke that was filling up the skies and the large sea of flames that was spreading down below. I could vaguely sense some creatures fleeing from the flames, others trapped within as well. Damn it all, how could this have happened? This forest fire was huge and spreading fast in all directions, but turning my attention towards it would only give the perpetrator more time to cause havoc. To make it worse, the goblin village isn't too far from here. I need this fire contained now. Trainee, I called out to the dryad using thought communication. She had been following close behind from below, though I doubt she would be able to do much in the mass of flames that were present. Yes, my lord, she responded, her voice echoing within my mind. Leave the flame's spirit to me. You and your sisters should focus on containing the fire, and if possible, putting it out. Gather as much aid as you can. I told her urgently. The dryads could instantly travel to any location within their domain of the forest, and so they may be able to gather monsters that would help contain the fire. Also, one of your sisters should go and warn the goblins to evacuate the village. The fire is rapidly spreading. Already done, my lord. As soon as the situation was out of our control, Tria went to warn the goblins of the situation. Trainee reported much to my relief. That was one less thing I had to worry about. Good, then focus on containing this wildfire. I'll take care of the enemy, I said before flying above the flames towards the magical signature I could sense, but not before Trainee delivered one last message. Please be careful, my lord. Ifrit has summoned 4 salamanders, minor fire spirits, to fight alongside it. Trainee warned. I nodded my head, not that she could see that, but I was grateful for the warning. Flying through a large amount of smoke basically rendered my sense of sight and smell useless, meaning I had to rely on magic sense to make my way through this. Fortunately, the skill functioned in a manner similar to echolocation, meaning I could see just fine, and given the large and erratic magical presence of my enemy, I didn't have to waste time looking around and instead made a beeline for his location. I arrived at the scene within minutes, arriving in time to see a muscular, horned humanoid being with brown skin, claws, and a tail levitating in the air just below me. Its deep red hair seemingly made out of fire, and it was only wearing pants, leaving its upper body fully exposed. That must be Ifrit, the greater elemental of fire, I thought as I decided to take in the situation a bit before diving in. The spirit in question had yet to even notice my presence. Its gaze focused on the fight taking place on the ground, between a blonde-haired human and 2 lizard-like creatures, which I could only assume were the salamanders Trainee had warned me about. Behind the blonde were 3 human bodies, badly burned and injured. They were alive, but barely, and given the environment, they wouldn't last much longer. The blonde himself was in bad condition and probably exhausted. Given that I couldn't sense any more spirits within the surrounding area, it was safe to assume that either he or his friends had defeated the other 2 salamanders. Shizue, snap out of it. The blonde yelled as he swung his blade at one of the approaching salamanders. The creature avoided the attack by pulling back at the last second, but not before launching a fireball attack from its mouth. Given the proximity, the blonde could not dodge, and even if he did, the other 3 behind him would be the ones to get struck. In the end, he managed to bring his shield up to avoid the brunt of the attack, but the intense heat from it still affected and burned him a bit. Looks like I get to play hero for the hero, I muttered, having concluded that this blonde must be one of the heroes Trainee spoke about, with the other having been the vessel for Ifrit. Using hide form to conceal my presence, I dove in from my higher position. Ifrit didn't notice me until I was already flying past him, and as much as I would have liked to kill it, I was more focused on saving those humans at the moment. Drawing my blade, I swiftly cut through the 2 salamanders before landing in front of the half-cooked blonde hero with my blade back in my sheath. Now that's how you nail a dramatic entrance, I mentally cheered as I stood up. My gaze met the cautious and wary eyes of the blonde hero. Are you all right? I asked. Obviously he was anything, but it was more out of courtesy than anything else. Who are you? The blonde asked as he raised his blade and pointed it towards me, his body shaking from exhaustion and a pained expression visible on his face. This guy was in no condition to fight, but he was willing to fight because he had something to protect. My name is Rimuru Tempest, and I am the guardian of the great forest of Jura. There's no need for alarm, as I am here to help you and your friends, and to put a stop to this fire spirit's rampage, I told him in a reassuring tone. Masayuki Hanju, the blonde says, as his body begins to sway. My eyes widen slightly as that name is definitely Japanese. This guy was an otherworlder. Please, save Miss Shizue, it's not her fault. The blonde pleads, barely hanging on to consciousness at this point. While I respect you for trying to appeal to your friend to regain control, she is currently under the effects of magic caused by another Majin. I said as I turned away from the blonde. I will do what I can, but I make no promises. Now I couldn't help but wonder if the other hero was also Japanese as well. I couldn't just destroy Ifrit without harming the human inside. Damn it all. Alert, incoming attack. The warning from Great Sage allowed me to promptly raise my wings and fold them in front of me, blocking the two incoming fireballs that had been aimed at me. Unraveling them, I was surprised to see the two salamanders I'd cut down earlier flapping their wings in midair once more, being the ones who launched those attacks. I thought I split these guys in two. What the hell? Answer. As spiritual life forms, salamanders and other spirits are immune to physical damage. Use of magic and related arts is recommended. I get the feeling this is one of those things that's common knowledge. Guess I should have been more thorough with my homework. I thought with a sigh. That's what it meant to lack experience in a world filled with magic and monsters. Even the most basic and simple of things had the utmost importance in a life or death situation. I turned my head slightly towards the blonde hero, Masayuki, only to see him unconscious along with the other three adventurers. Protecting them whilst fighting these three is going to be a pain. Best to get them out of here. Ranga. I called the Tempest Wolf telepathically. The ever-loyal companion heeded my call not a second later, jumping out of my shadow and quickly growing to full size. How may I be of assistance, master? Ranga asked as he growled at the two salamanders, yellow lightning sparkling across his body, ready to be unleashed at my command. As much as I wanted to see the fruits of Ranga's training, I needed him to do something else for the moment. Sorry, Ranga. I need you to get these four out of harm's way. Take them to the goblins and tell them to treat these four with potions. I explained, Ranga actually letting out a whining sound at not being able to fight and prove his strength. Don't worry about it. Your time to prove your strength will come, but for now, I need these four out of here so I can fight without holding back. Think you can do that? Yes, master. Leave it to me. Ranga responded enthusiastically. After securing the four of them on Ranga's back, the Tempest Wolf leapt into the shadows with his cargo, heading towards the goblin village. With them gone, I finally turned my attention towards my foes. The two salamanders that seemed to have returned to their master's side, the fire elemental spirit Ifrit. I didn't get why neither of them had attacked this whole time Ranga had been here, but I was glad for it. Now they had my undivided attention. The salamanders won't be an issue now that I know how to deal with them, but Ifrit. With the fire elemental, I had to take into consideration the host's body. Too much damage and this Shizue person could die, so I couldn't just cut into Ifrit like I had done with the salamanders. If only there was a way to separate the spirit and the host. Answer. Given the current circumstances, it is possible to separate the spirit from the host using the unique skill, Apex Predator, though results of such an action are unknown. What do you mean current circumstances? I asked with minor suspicion. Separating a spirit dwelling within its host is currently impossible for the user. However, given that this spirit has taken over its host and manifested outwards, it's possible to extract its spiritual body and separate from the host. Makes sense, I think. I wouldn't pretend to grasp the mechanics of what was being explained. One thing was for sure, I trusted Great Sage. It had yet to steer me wrong in the months I'd reincarnated into this world. I didn't need to understand everything. As long as it said this plan would work, then I had no reason to doubt it. Ah, it seems you still can't properly comprehend emotions. I thought with a sweat drop. Don't worry, you'll get there eventually. Just know that I trust you, partner. Time seemed to flow normally as the thought acceleration I'd activated wore off. Ifrit raised its hand and pointed at me, Immediately, the two salamanders charged at me, with the first one diving straight for me while the other tried to flank me from my right, its mouth glowing bright red from the flames building up within. "Not on my watch," I shouted as I swiftly vanished from my position, surprising the two inferior spirits as they stopped in their tracks and began to look around frantically. A second later, I appeared behind the one that had been charging straight for me, blade drawn and coated in black lightning. Too slow, I thought, as the salamander noticed my presence a second too late, before I cut it down with numerous slashes that turned it into chopped liver. Target 1 eliminated. Great Sage, assuring me that the salamander was down for good this time, felt reassuring. But I was kind of disappointed by how weak that salamander was and how easy it was to kill. Turning towards the other salamander, I noticed that it seemed far more cautious than it had been before, not that that was going to help much. I raised my hands towards the sky, dark clouds quickly forming, before a black bolt of lightning descended, tearing right through the salamander and striking the ground beneath it with an explosion. Weak. I couldn't help but mutter in disappointment. I'd really been expecting a lot more, but that was hardly a warm-up. I turned my attention towards Ifrit. His presence was significantly greater than that of the salamanders, and with whatever power Jelmuyad had used to corrupt him, his power was currently greater than even Trainee's. It was no wonder she had struggled, that and the elemental advantage Ifrit held over her. "Hopefully you can provide a better challenge," I said as Ifrit slowly began to lower himself towards me, moving for the first time since my arrival. Flapping my wings, I slowly rose from the ground, my draconic emerald green eyes fixed on the bright gold ones of the foe before me. The two of us were eventually at eye level, both hovering above the ground a little. For a moment, neither of us moved, our bodies perfectly still as we merely stared at each other. A silent battle of wills took place as we measured each other's resolve. That was quickly broken by Ifrit stretching his hand towards me, a large torrent of flames being shot my way. Taking that as the initiation of our battle, I charged forward, evading the jet of fire by tilting my body to the side and continuing my charge. Ifrit merely adjusted its trajectory, the stream of fire following me in the sky as I continued to evade with various maneuvers. I closed the gap bit by bit before I was suddenly before him, blade drawn and covered in black lightning as I slashed at it. However, something peculiar happened. Rather than getting struck by my attack, my sword went right through him, his body seemingly becoming fire itself. What the heck was that? I questioned as I came to a halt and turned back towards the fire elemental, who seemed unfazed by my attack. The individual Ifrit possesses the intrinsic skill, flame transformation, allowing it to turn its body into flames. Would you like to copy this skill? Nah, I can copy that and any other skills it has when I devour it, I thought with a grin. So Ifrit had a few tricks up its sleeve? That was fine. Made things that much more interesting for me in the end. Rayura, Ifrit suddenly cried out, to my shock, since this was my first time hearing its voice or anything close to it. Its flame hair seemed to grow darker and larger, and the air around us seemed to get hotter. And that was saying something, considering we were already in the middle of a forest fire. All of a sudden, numerous Ifrits began to appear in bursts of fire. They kept growing in number until there were about 8 of them in total, all looking towards me with that same confident yet emotionless expression, as if mocking me. Seriously, he can clone himself too? I asked out loud. I wasn't really worried. With my resistances, I could probably handle 100 of them if I needed to. Notice, this is the extra skill, Body Double. It allows the user to create replicas of themselves that function independently, but according to the user's wishes. So in other words, it's like the shadow clone technique from Naruto. Good to know, I thought with a smirk. The numerous numbers would be a bit annoying, but in the end, the result would still be the same. If anything, I looked forward to the workout. Not wanting to give my opponent the chance to go on the offensive, I swiftly flew forward with a mighty flap of my wings, swiftly closing the gap between me and my prey. In an instant, I was before one of the body doubles. I coated my blade with water before slashing right through the first clone, its body bursting into steam upon contact. Great Sage had notified me a while ago that all of my water manipulation techniques were physical abilities since I was using pre-existing water stored in my stomach. That being said, I dedicated some time to learning to use magicule-based skills for water. I was glad I'd actually decided to do so, otherwise it would have been impossible to use water-based skills against Ifrit. I swiftly flew higher, dodging a torrent of flames aimed for me by an Ifrit further away from me, two more suddenly appearing on either side of me, with flaming fists drawn back. I used my wings to block both fists, before forcefully opening them, pushing both spirit doubles away from me. Water blade, I shouted as I swung my sword, launching two sharp arcs of water at both copies on opposing ends. My attack struck true and the doubles vanished in a burst of steam. Like I thought, these doubles aren't that strong endurance-wise. A single strong hit and they're out. This really is a Shadow clone ripoff. If that was the case, the best thing to do was to go with a wide-range attack that would do enough harm to the body doubles and make them vanish. Fortunately, I had one such technique in my arsenal, the only downside being I hadn't yet mastered it to the point I was aiming for. Still, that imperfection may just be what I needed here. I suddenly felt an increase in magic around me, as three Ifrits unleashed rather large torrents of flames towards me from three directions. I suppose now was as good a time as any to try out that new skill of mine, and given the surrounding land was burnt for miles, I didn't have to worry about collateral damage either. Black wind, reverse hurricane, I shouted as I brought my wings in close, forming an almost cocoon-like shell around my body, before I started spinning to the right rapidly, my body instantly becoming a blur. The effect was instantaneous. As I released magicules, black wind currents began forming around me, stopping the tri-pronged attack of flames in their tracks. But I didn't stop there. No way in hell I would. With the expenditure of more magicules, the black tornado of wind grew larger and expanded further, the wind currents pulling in everything around me with such force that several trees were instantly uprooted and pulled into the growing black cyclone. Ifrit and its remaining 5 body doubles were faring no better. Since they couldn't be harmed by physical objects, they were unaffected by the large debris being pulled in by the storm, which was a shame but not unexpected. However, the black winds themselves were backed with my magicules, and the force pulling them in was stronger than they could escape from. One by one, the body doubles began to explode in flames under the pressure of my wind currents, Ifrit looking more and more nervous as it was also being pulled in whilst its doubles vanished. Soon enough, there was only one Ifrit remaining. I was pretty sure this was the real one, given that despite sustaining continuous damage from being so close to my attack, it had yet to pop like the rest. Once I was sure I let up on the storm I created, I stopped spinning at its epicenter, as the violent wind currents vanished and all the debris from earlier began falling and crashing down on the ground below us. I didn't pay attention to all this, though, ignoring the falling debris around us as I kept my eye on Ifrit. If you have nothing more to offer, then I guess this is it for you, I said unimpressed. To be honest, I'd expected more of a workout. Then again, fighting a fire elemental when you have flame resistance just wasn't fair, but I doubt it would have been much of a fight with or without. KHHR. Ifrit's eyes widened in both shock and slight fear as it backed away slightly. It seemed even it understood that it was no match for me. Its only hope at this point was to escape, not that I had any intention of letting it. I still had to save the human it had taken over, after all. In a desperate attempt, Ifrit launched another torrent of flames towards me, but by now I was getting tired of the same old tricks that were bound to have no effect on me. Before the attack could land, I vanished from its line of sight with my superior agility, bound it with multiple layers of sticky steel thread before appearing behind it, with said threads connected to the tips of my fingers. You put up a decent fight, but it's over now, I said calmly as Ifrit turned to face me, struggling against the threads that bound it, but it was useless. It tried heating up its body further to burn the threads, but given the threads shared the same resistances as the user, it proved to be pointless. Sorry, time to give this body back to its owner. With those final words, I channeled black lightning into the threads on my fingertips. The lightning traveled along the thread until it struck and shocked the fire spirit. Error! Ifrit cried out as the lightning coursed through its body. I had to be careful not to put too much power into the attack, since the body I was actually harming belonged to the host and not the spirit. But the attack still served its purpose, stunning the spirit and creating the opening I needed to finally end this. I quickly closed the gap between us and slammed the palm of my left hand into the stunned fire spirit's open chest. "Devour my prey, apex predator," I called out as the swirling mass of black magicules surrounded Ifrit's form. I let Great Sage handle the process of separating the corrupted spirit Ifrit from its human host, knowing it would do a better job at it than I would. Notice, separation of the corrupted fire elemental spirit Ifrit successful. Initiating analysis and assimilation of the spirit. With that, the swirling black magicules receded back into my body, leaving a slightly smaller and slender figure of a human woman in its place. Almost immediately, her body began to fall, no longer levitating, but I swiftly caught the unconscious lady, carrying her bridal style before bringing her to the ground and gently laying her down. It was only after I placed her on the ground that I got a good and proper look at her. A young woman with a slim figure, black hair, and small burn marks on the side of her face. She had a slightly pale complexion, though whether that was her natural skin color or as a result of her current condition, I had no idea. So this is Shizue. She certainly looked Japanese judging from her facial features alone, and her name definitely matched too. Great Sage, analyze her body for any injuries. I wasn't quite sure if she had gotten hurt from the attacks I'd done on Ifrit. Better to be sure she was okay. Analysis complete. The individual Shizue has sustained no permanent injury. I breathed out a sigh of relief at that, but just to be on the safe side, I cast Greater Heal to heal the minor injuries she had sustained both from Ifrit taking over and our battle. As I looked at her, I couldn't help but notice that she looked familiar, almost as though I had seen her before, though I couldn't quite recall from where. Answer: the individual Shizue is one of the women foretold to be your destined one. That's it. She was the first lady that appeared in the crystal ball, the one surrounded by the children. It all came rushing back to me like a flood at Great Sage's reminder. How could I have forgotten something important like that? Though, given everything that had just happened recently, perhaps I simply wasn't in my best state of mind. Still though, what were the chances that I would meet her so soon? Aside from the ones I was aware lived in Jura, namely Trainee, the princess, and the purple ogress, I hadn't really expected to run into any of the other women from the crystal orb so soon. As a dragon, my lifespan was bound to be longer than that of a human's. I was probably looking at centuries at minimum. So it wasn't that far-fetched for me to assume I would be meeting some of the other girls far down the line rather than anytime soon. Lord Rimuru. My attention was drawn to my left as Trainee appeared, looking relieved and happy to see that I was okay and in one piece. "Hey, I took care of the threat. Ifrit can't do any more harm now," I told her with a nod, though it was obvious given the fire spirit was nowhere in sight. "What about you? Aren't you and the others supposed to be putting out the fire?" I asked, as I remembered assigning that task to Trainee, telling her to get help from other species if need be to contain the rapidly spreading fire. "The wildfire has been contained, my lord. Thanks in part to your intervention," Trainee responded with a smile. "Me?" I asked, wondering what she was going on about. I was pretty sure I'd been fighting fire spirits this whole time. "Yes, the storm that manifested earlier, which I can safely assume was your doing, halted the spreading flames by pulling wind currents towards it," Trainee explained. That made more sense. The fight with Ifrit had literally taken place in the center of the spreading flames, and the cyclone was literally sucking a large amount of wind from various directions. So in a way, the cyclone had sucked the flames dry rather than fanning them, making them easier to contain and put out. "Yes, we enlisted aid from the merfolk, who make their homes in one of the nearby lakes and specialize in water magic and life magic. With their water-based skills, we were able to quickly put out the flames," Trainee explained. "Merfolk? Those are like fish people, right?" I thought. I couldn't help but wonder if they were humans with fishtails like what I saw in some anime and manga. Notice, merfolk are a humanoid fish-like species within Jura that specialize in water manipulation and life magic. They are B-rank monsters and possess high levels of intelligence. The explanation from Great Sage came with a mental image of what the average merfolk looked like in this world, and I had to say that I was disappointed. Covered from head to toe in dull fish scales, and having fish heads for, well, heads. I wouldn't call them ugly, but they could be far more appealing. I'll have to thank them for their aid. But not today. For now, I was going to take Shizue back to the Goblin Village so she could get some proper rest without discomfort. I'm sure they'd be honored to receive such praise from you. Trainee responded calmly. They know who I am. I asked as the implications of Trainee's statement became clear to me. Of course, as we discussed, my sisters and I have begun to slowly but surely spread word of your presence. However, given your recent display of power, I'm sure many will be well aware within the week. Trainee said with a giggle as I looked at her disbelieving. Was it that noticeable? Indeed, a black storm that uprooted trees for miles and pierced the heavens. Even if most didn't see it, they surely would have felt the impact. Trainee reasoned. I remembered discussing the prospect of spreading word of my existence with Trainee. It was around the time about King Gazel's suggestion of forming a nation. We agreed it was important to get my name out there before doing anything. Anyways, I'll handle that later. For now, I'll take this woman back to the Goblin Village. She was Ifrit's host. I see. That being said, I do have another job to trouble you with, Trainee. I said as I turned towards her with a serious expression, my emerald eyes glowing green with hidden anger. It's no trouble at all, my lord. I'm happy to be of use to you, Trainee said in a slightly chipper tone in an attempt to lighten the mood. Fine, Jelmut, I said, each syllable coming out with venom and anger. I want to know what he's doing in this forest if he's still here, and if possible his objective. I may have made the mistake of letting him go once, but I wouldn't do it again. That bastard had set my mother's forest ablaze and almost caused me to kill one of my future mates. The way I saw it, he was already dead. Yes, my lord, we'll find and report any activities related to him as soon as we can, Trainee said with a bow, her expression unusually serious, more than likely realizing I wasn't in the mood for games. Without another word, she vanished in a swirl of leaves. Turning back towards the still unconscious Shizue, I decided it was time to head back to the Goblin Village. I still had to check on the condition of those other 4 humans as well. And so I lifted her from the ground bridal style, which was weird considering she looked at least 2 times older than me if one were to measure our age based on human standards. Once I was comfortable, and I was sure she wouldn't fall, I took off into the air once more, my draconic wings flapping as we took off.